Okay, let's give it a go. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Richard. Can you hear me? Good morning. We seem to have a bit of a glitch on your sound. I can't seem to hear you this morning. I'm going to say hello to our audience. Maybe we just quickly get the sound working. And I'm not sure if it's a mic.
It's my microphone. Is that better?
There we go. Yeah, good old technology. I for a moment there, I was getting a bit worried, but let's kickstart the podcast. Welcome, Richard. Good morning.
Hi, Dudley. Good morning.
Good morning. Okay, so welcome everyone to another 100 Days and Beyond podcast, where we speak to the guys that do the ins and outs, and the roundabouts. I think if you had to do a nice rhyme. Of the M&A world, especially the post-merger or post-acquisition integration work. And today we got someone really, really special, someone who's a career integration specialist and has chosen, I think, really very smartly to stay within one organization for a long period of time, and got to really know his industry, got to really know the background and the overall approach. And I think today we're going to be talking a bit about things like sustainability and so on. But let me introduce Richard to you. Richard Sederman is Strategy M&A Director of, within the FTSE Industries global manufacturing sector. Now, manufacturing as a sector has got its quirks and it's got its difficulties, and has experienced multiple shifts, I think, during your career, Richard. If I just think about the outsourcing and now things moving back and so on, and different types of materials being used within manufacturing and so on. I think it's going to be an amazing episode. Thank you very much for joining me this morning. And we look forward to a good show, Richard.
You're welcome. I'm glad to be here. Glad to be invited.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah. So I just quickly want to go through you talk about being an accomplished and driven senior M&A and a strategy director with an extensive history in listed FTSE companies with over 10,000 employees across the world. I mean, that is significant. For any entity to get past a few hundred to a few thousand to in excess of 10,000, I mean, that creates one incredible organism, if you like, or an organization that requires a lot more steering, a lot more systems and processes and things like that. But in addition, I would imagine you heading up, or you being part of that whole merger and acquisition effort of looking to I think over a period of time change and move into different industries, not industries, but within your industry, but move into different entities that enhance or move your strategy forward. And I'd love to hear a bit about that. But before we get into that, let's just go back a few bits and let's just talk about how did you get into this, and how did you get into the organization that you're currently working with, and understand that this is your sort of your purpose and your the place you're going to be.
Well, I mean, as you mentioned at the start, Dudley, I've been in the company for a long time, and I obviously made the decision to work there when I was quite young, and I think the things that appealed back then were that it was a large international company, and that it was able to offer good training and a good development path, but also it was within the manufacturing sector, which was something I particularly wanted to work in. And it offered a lot of broad diversity, both in terms of end customers, markets, geographies, cultures, everything like that. So that was what really appealed to me when I started.
Yeah, and I think you've really harnessed that to a great extent. And if I look at your CV and your career, I think it's been magnificent. I think the things that you have achieved and that you are now being driven to achieve. I want to talk around the sustainability as a strategic driver, and I also want to talk around sort of what are the trends in manufacturing right now. And when you go out and look for target entities and think about integrations and that, after you've selected your target, tell us what goes through your mind. I mean, what you strategically, you've been with this entity, you know where the company is going from a broader perspective. You need to fulfill on that strategy. Tell us a bit about how you go about that whole that process and that thinking. If you don't mind, let's just go through sort of a day in the life of Richard.
Well, okay, so I mean, yeah, a big part of what I'm doing is screening a very opaque and fragmented market for companies that possibly could work within the Essentra components family, and what value can it add. So we're always looking to create value when we're looking for acquisitions, and either it has to fit absolutely brilliantly within our current strategy, or it can push us into new areas that might be interesting and growing in the future. So we have criteria that we assess businesses against. What's it going to add from geography, people, product perspective, and then what can we do to integrate that into our overall business to generate value. But I think going back to your first point in the question is increasingly sustainability has to align strategically as well. And also, as we're looking at creating value in the future, it's not just necessarily enterprise value, but it's sort of social value as well, or creating a responsible company is a very important part of any kind of acquisition strategy as well. So yeah, we've definitely built that into our criteria, and that's something that is developing at the moment. And I think it's really interesting you talk about the manufacturing sector, because we have seen a real shift. Probably the COVID period accelerated that shift towards kind of companies going from having a sort of an annual report listed sustainability strategy that wasn't really taking a hold within the company, to one that really is taking hold in the company now. And you're seeing that with real hard KPIs being set by listed businesses, wanting to really make sort of some significant progress, whether it be by 2025 or 2030 or 2040. That's a really important part of a business's long-term goals, and therefore has to align to any M&A strategy.
Yeah, and I imagine, I mean, you're talking about the KPIs and I often see, I mean, especially if you look at sustainability, things like the environmental impact of different types of even things like packaging and plastics versus paper. And you don't have that many options if you think about it, but you got to be thinking sort of beyond that. You got to be thinking outside the box, to use a cliche, but you got to be thinking about sustainability and reaching sustainability targets that have been set sort of at the boardroom level, or even at the shareholder level, where it's, by this date you have to have achieved X. I mean, that's a very, very big ask, and you almost have to do that through an M&A process, because sometimes, and I don't, you'll have to tell us more at your current organization, but sometimes within the organizations you've got this legacy that you have almost pulling you back into the older sort of mechanisms that sort of work, the comfort zone space, if you like. You get pulled into that, but you get driven to these new targets, and these new targets are set dates, sort of by 2030, by 2025, by this, by that. Somebody's thought of a date, right? So they've put out the date, and they said, okay, well, let's be sustainable by that date, and this is what we measure it against. I mean, how do you then translate that into something that's practical and real? I mean, let's go through a bit of that process.
I think a lot of companies are in the process of trying to crystallize it into a strategy with a kind of to develop the roadmap that they need to get there. So I don't think it's clear, and I think a lot of the goals are set where you can't quite create a roadmap yet, because either the technology doesn't exist yet to enable you to complete them, and you have to have this sort of belief and faith that the wider economy will develop the technology and tools to enable us to achieve them by whether it be 2030 or 2040. One of the points you made was really interesting about how are we going to get there, and how does M&A impact on this? These KPIs are often absolute KPIs that we're working to. Net zero, that's not a 20% reduction that you can just lob in some M&A that's got a bad background and say we're going to make a 20% improvement, and a 20% improvement is good enough. We're going for an absolute target here. So it does have a real impact on the integration planning for any M&A, about how they're going to impact your overall corporate goals, whether it be environmental or social, but particularly things like the carbon measurement schemes that are out there, which they themselves are only crystallizing at the moment, and how we're benchmarking and things like that. So it's definitely an interesting challenge and one to think through, but all adds to the fun of integration planning.
Yeah, it is, and I'm sure there's also the added element of, you have potentially, I mean, within such a large group, you've got legacy businesses, I'm not sure, there's legacy businesses, divisions, and so on, that potentially need to be either mothballed or be exited, in order to move towards that net zero target. So from an M&A perspective, I mean, you're not necessarily just working on a forward-looking, I'm going to keep acquiring to try and dilute what is not quite as sustainable or as green as what it should be, or carbon neutral. I'm not sure how that works. And then you also have this I think a lot of pressure from the outside around, a lot of the press has spoken about greenwashing, sort of this offset mentality where I can be naughty over there, but over there I can be good, and then the balance between the good and the bad makes me net zero. I mean, tell us a bit about that thinking, sort of my past, my legacy businesses versus new, and then how do I sort of get that balance right?
So I guess the dealing with legacy businesses is definitely an interesting challenge, because there are some that you've acquired maybe in areas where it's either difficult to get non-waste to landfill operations that just don't exist in that geography, or renewable energy, for example, isn't available to acquire in that geography. That makes it very difficult to get the kind of scope 1, scope 2 emissions down to zero, which we really should be doing. In terms of offsetting, absolutely no, we don't look, that is an absolute last resort, really. It possibly is interesting to drive a kind of internal commercial or economic reason to say, well, you're going to have to pay for this offsetting if you, Mr. Business General Manager, don't do something about your actual carbon footprint. And kind of force it into people's P&Ls and targets. However, the goal is to have minimal offsets, and do this through kind of genuine carbon reduction. Going back to the kind of what does that mean for some of our kind of existing acquisitions? It really leads back to innovation. There's probably nothing that you kind of need to mothball or give up complete hope on it. The products that are being made now, however they're being made, have a useful purpose and a solution that's important to the customer. So as long as you make sure you're really close to the customer, understand what their solution is, and actually how you can bring sustainability to them, then you need to then invest in innovation, perhaps in a slightly different way to what you're used to bring sustainable products and services to your market. And I think that's something we try and do as part of our strategy, is to do that in a kind of hassle-free manner. So rather than making it difficult for our customers to attain sustainability, we're trying to just build it into our standard product offer. So over time, people can just continue to buy from us, but it will be an increasingly sustainable product offer.
Yeah, I love the way that you bring the customer back into it, because sometimes one forgets. I mean, for me, I like what Peter Drucker said about, the reason, the purpose of a business is to acquire customers to fulfill their needs. I think at the when you have such a large entity, one can almost sometimes forget the customer. You get so busy with all the other stuff, and you say, oh shoot, we actually do have some customers to support. And I imagine there's also a bit of a supply chain too. So you've got to be thinking about not just about your current entity, but you've got to be thinking about the customers. So having good conversations with existing clients or customers, looking at new markets and what are possibilities out there, and potential new customers, and then looking up and down the supply chain. I'm sure there are ways in which, instead of trying to do everything within the organization, maybe look towards suppliers supporting that process. I mean, just tell us how that sort of balance. How do you get those conversations? I mean, that's a pretty busy busy environment, I'm sure.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess what some of the thoughts spring to mind within the supply chain are things like the material supply chain, for example, and that's clearly changing quite significantly as the types of materials required are changing. M&A can be very useful for this. So either, it can be something where there's a particular innovative material provider, and that might be interesting, for example, or a particular supply chain might be changing. So as people want to reduce their transport miles, for example, the location of which either you manufacture or have to supply to might be changing, and therefore acquiring capability within a particular geography to support the developing supply chain can both help from a supply chain resilience, as we've seen through COVID, but also can help actually from a sustainability angle. And I guess as we move forward to the future and thinking about the value of acquisitions, we will have carbon budgets, and actually you'll have to plan not only the financial business model of an acquisition, but you'll have to plan the carbon business model of an acquisition as well. So thinking that all through and starting to add these thoughts to the process now is hopefully an important thing to set us on the right sort of playbook journey for the future.
Yeah, and I'm sure those conversations with suppliers and supply chain, to include them in the process, and also to engage them in trying to move towards your targets, but also engaging them in helping them reach their targets. Because I think these days, more so than in the past, it's not an us and them environment. It's together. We need to reach these net zero targets. You can't do it one without the other. So I'm really enjoying that new sort of way of doing things. It becomes less selfish, and it becomes more joint. That's my feeling, and that's what I've been sort of understanding from the market as well. There's people are doing the joint work, or doing the way of saying, you know what, we can't bear the entire responsibility for net zero. We have to engage our partners and so on. So yeah, I mean, just tell us a bit about that. I mean,
well, I mean, I guess it's a case of working with the main suppliers. I think the first bit of analysis is to try and understand what the major impacts are of a particular business, whether it be the business that you have and it's part of your portfolio of recent acquisitions, or it's a business you're looking at in the future. Is what's driving the issue. So you need kind of an understanding of where in the supply chain the issues are, and typically the sort of the scope 3 carbon emissions that happen outside within your kind of supply chain. It's working with those suppliers to say, okay, well, what's your net zero target? How's it going to align to ours? And if it doesn't, are you going to change, or are we going to look for a different supplier? So in some ways, I like to kind of think as like an old, I like the kind of economy driven nature that we work in. I like to think that if you're not sustainable, you're not going to stay in, your business is not sustainable. If you're not environmentally or socially responsible, then you're not going to stay in business. So you can look at it from a selfish angle as well as a doing good for the planet angle. Is if you want to stay in business and make money, if you can provide sustainable solutions, they're the ones that are going to get chosen by the customer ultimately.
Yeah, and I think if you look at the end user as the final customer, they will drive, I think, probably the behavior of that entire supply chain. Because if you think about it, every buyer within the supply chain is a customer of someone else. I mean, you're a customer of your suppliers, and your suppliers are customers of their suppliers, and so on. So it always goes down. I've also heard that it only goes down one level. So these days, especially in terms of the regulations of the carbon emissions and so on, so the ability to report back, you don't need to report back multiple layers up and down the supply chain. I mean, just tell us a bit about the regulation around the reporting structures, because it appears to me there's still a lot that needs to be done from a regulation point of view of reporting and who's responsible for what. I mean, what is your experience around that whole sustainability discussion that's busy happening? Are you getting involved with the sort of government institutions?
No, so I wouldn't say that we're sort of big enough to really be lobbying the government institutions, but I think there are some. I mean, it's varied depending on the geography, and I think that this whole requirement for reporting is evolving at the moment. There are a number of sort of widely recognised but not official accolades that you can work towards to demonstrate your kind of progress in sustainability. And then there are clearly some government targets and government reporting requirements that are required, and they are increasing. And so I think the important thing at the moment is that you have to have a kind of horizon checking process within the business to make sure you know what's coming in your geography. And actually, this comes back to M&A as well. You've got to be looking 2-3 years ahead in the geography that you're acquiring in, because you could just be creating yourself an absolute internal reporting nightmare, because the rest of your organization isn't going to integrate with so and so in a certain country unless you change your reporting methods and requirements. So you have to be very careful, and you have to look forward. I think everything's developing. We are, the big push that's going to be coming out is going to be more around the kind of scope 3 emissions. So those within your supply chain. At the moment, we are in the process of signing up to SBTI, to the Science Based Targets Initiative, and that has enough credence around it to demonstrate what progress you're making, and you're actually in line with the sort of internationally agreed goals on maintaining temperature increases to within the levels they think are required.
Yeah, and I imagine there's also the big battle geographically. Some regulations within certain countries are probably a lot more strict, and others more lax. Others haven't quite got the standardization or the standards right. I mean, if I go to, and I shift slightly in terms of you do bring the geographic nature of what you do into it. I want to just go into a little bit more on the integration side, and just talk around on your LinkedIn profile. You talk about having this multi geography, multi divisional sort of approach. Your role, I mean, you have to work across multiple geographies. So you have to work across multiple divisions and so on. Just getting to know the changes and the movements in your current organization, and then being able to formulate, whatever the target is that you're moving forward to, and then having to plan that whole integration. Tell us what, do you have a sort of a blueprint that you work according to? Do you have a sort of a methodology that you've worked out? Is there something that you do on a standardized sort of way, or do you have to take each project as something unique, in terms of integration and M&A and that?
It's very much standardized. Although the standard is developing all the time, I think it's fair to say. So, we have a good set of tools that have been tested and reused a number of times. And I think but both that helps us get through a kind of a diligence quickly, but also the integration planning in a way that we all know and don't have to do so much rework. I guess with a kind of a big, a footprint across many countries and many often small business units operating, we're always pulling on resource that maybe they've got a full-time day job, and we're asking people to do extra to run a diligence and an integration project. So giving them as many tools as we can to make it easy, and having that kind of structure to provide it clearly makes the whole process much easier. And often, because we're doing it in one country, one year somewhere else, the next month somewhere else, we're often dealing with people in the organization that haven't done M&A in diligence or integration. So it's very often it's a new process for people that they're going through. So a set of tools is absolutely vital to make this kind of process repeatable in different geographies. So yeah, absolutely. I think the big thing is probably the cultural variation, in that you've got a set of tools, and you maybe go in and run an integration planning workshop, and if you do that in the US, it will have one complete cultural flavor, whereas then you run it in China through a COVID period and you're doing it virtually only, it will have a completely different set of cultural expectations, but also kind of flow and feel to how an integration session will work virtually. So I think it is a case of having those tools, but being very adaptable to any local cultural variation, just to make sure you get a plan that everyone's bought into and can work to.
Yeah, how do you? I mean, one of the part of your profile, you talk about cross-regional transformational projects, and this, because for me, when you're doing an acquisition, or when you're doing some kind of transactional deal, I mean, I'm guessing some of the transactions you do are not necessarily always an acquisition. It could be a joint venture. It could be a phased approach in terms of entering a new market. It might be buying one or two businesses and then expanding out from there once you get a better understanding. But if just the transformational part, do you do a lot of training? Do you provide training in that for those teams? Because realistically, if they are not exposed to integrations, or they're not exposed to M&A or due diligence, they already have their day jobs. They already almost, some of them are pushed to the limit as it is in terms of the work they have to do. Now you bring in an additional layer. You're saying you're a whole lot of tools. Let's get going. I'm sure you'll have to cascade a bit of training. You might have to. I'm not sure what term you would use, but you might have to bring in a few champions or super integrators, or whatever you want to call them, and have some pivots within certain departments that you would train and set up and run. Tell us a bit about sort of that those little nuances that people don't get to see, on a day-to-day basis.
So I guess I have a kind of, I like to think of integration as being as simple as possible, but it essentially needs good project management skills. Fundamentally, an integration is a project, so it needs managing by that. A lot of the nuances are the difference in culture, and the fact that you have to deliver projects with people that you've not worked with before. So yeah, absolutely, it's a combination of I think a really good onboarding experience. So we treat all acquired businesses as though they're new employees. So we go through, we have a structured program to onboard them. We don't just assume that, oh, you work for us now, you must know all our history and everything like that. We actually put them through what was effectively a new employee onboarding process to make sure they get that kind of understanding and experience of the organization. Clearly, the integration project itself, it needs a certain skill set, and we look to try and bring people from within our organization to run some of those projects. I think that's absolutely vital, because you have that kind of somebody with a cross-functional experience that understands the wider business, but can really get themselves the shoes under the table at the new business. And I think that's one critical thing. Another thing that I would also say it sort of leads to success in this area is separating out the day-to-day running of that new business with the integration of the business. They're two projects that are kind of not aligned, but really important to do from day one. So you have to hit month one numbers, you have to hit month two numbers. So there's that immediate running of the business and making sure the heartbeat of how you're pushing that business keeps going. But then you've got a load of strategic projects that you want to execute over maybe a 3, 6, 12-month period to get the business actually integrated from a kind of broader culture perspective, from achieving the longer term synergies that you can get, whether it be commercially or operationally or however. And that is a build it and do it well. And that's making sure that the people that are focused on that are free from, okay, what were sales yesterday, what were orders yesterday, and trying to separate those two things out. Obviously, they have to work very closely together to make it a success, but actually making sure the responsibilities for those two things are clearly defined.
Yeah, what comes to mind, I'm not sure if you've ever saw that that documentary on, not sure if it was Netflix or one of those, where it was called American Factory. I don't know if you ever saw that. Yeah. It was about a Chinese organization that manufactured windscreens for motor cars, and they had bought an old American factory and got it up and running again. I think it was actually dormant, and they had bought this entity, and they had made promises to the local American workforce that they would bring them back and re-employ them and so on. And because they were supposed to have the skills and so on to manufacture these windscreens. And then they brought people from China into this American factory, managers and so on. And they tried to do this entire integration process, and how different, entirely different the cultures were. I mean, the Chinese don't do tea breaks. They don't have a TV and a microwave in their sort of tea room, if you like. They just work 12 hours a day, and then they go, they'll work like 6 days a week. And then on the American side, I mean, that's seen as like slave labor in a way. I mean, that's frowned upon, and they wanted their tea breaks, and they wanted their regimented ways, and they also weren't prepared to lift certain things that were above a certain weight, kind of thing. I mean, it's an absolutely fascinating journey of integration of two polar opposite cultures, management styles. I mean, the entire just bringing, and even the manufacturing processes. Now, the old machines that used to work in the old American factory were outdated, so they had to bring over and start upgrading and updating the existing machines. So now they had to train the local American workforce to get to use those, and they were breaking these windscreens. I mean, these windscreens were literally exploding, and it was fascinating to see how they eventually did it. And it's a successful business today, but it did take them time. It took them, I can't remember the exact time, but it took them a few years to get that balance right, with loads and loads and loads of mistakes, and I think a load of cost. So I'm just sort of putting that picture out there, and I'm saying, okay, if you do these integrations and so on with these very diverse cultures, you come in and you're doing an onboarding from your larger organization potentially to a smaller organization. You onboarding them. Is there no onboarding from their side, as in, hey, actually, this is the way we do things around here compared to, the way. I'm just trying to understand that dynamic, because it's actually so fascinating bringing people on board. Tell us a bit, one or two of your experiences around that.
Yeah, so I think generally speaking, if the organization coming on board is much smaller, the starting principle is certainly vision and purpose and things like that will be, they need to be kind of integrated from larger to smaller. But then it depends what you're acquiring and depends what you want to get out of it, as to whether what values. Are there some values that they bring, maybe modern day values that I find it harder to find in larger, older manufacturing organizations, such as digitalization and sustainability, for example. How can you get some of those good things back out into the larger organization? Yeah, it's always a challenge, and I think even you talked about two very diverse geographies there, with clearly very different cultures. You can get that same thing within a country if the two businesses had genuinely different cultures before. And I think this is one of the things that makes integration so interesting, is it's not something that you can just predict and do. Whenever, if you're putting two operations together, the amount of sort of implicit knowledge or just retained knowledge within the workforce that isn't and almost can't be documented in a way that's useful to transfer, how can you sort of speed up that process where everyone shares what they know, and then you can drive value out of that? I think it's really difficult, and getting people aligned, getting people to see that each other are human, I think is probably the one of the really interesting challenges. I've seen a recent example. There's a great opportunity between a Middle Eastern business and a Chinese business, for us to grow, share knowledge, and build on what we're doing, and actually, you can share each other's email addresses, you can share each other's job titles, and say work with these people and create value, but that doesn't give people the understanding that they're both human, they've both got the same challenges, and yeah, one may have a microwave oven in the pantry, and the other may not, but actually, yeah, a lot, if they can see each other and understand each other as humans, they can overcome those kind of cultural boundaries much better.
Yeah, just going back to this documentary, I mean, they had classes for the Chinese people that they had brought across, of the American way of living. Like, what is a hamburger? And what is the American style of eating and diet and all that. I mean, they had to go right down to food and I think even things like family values and so on. I mean, it was they really had to go down to almost like grassroots type of education for both, because the Chinese people that came across, I mean, they were missing their families. I mean, they had literally left their families behind for 6 or 12 months. They initially anticipated this to be, all we have to do is come and just show them how to use the machines and off we go. And it turned out to be exactly the opposite. So I mean, that's a fascinating dynamic. I mean, have you got any comments on that?
Not so many sort of experiences exactly like that. I mean, I think we typically haven't moved people significant geographies other than perhaps some of the leadership and management teams. But yeah, absolutely. In those cases, we have used some kind of cultural education programs to help people, but yeah, we haven't done it en masse or anything like that. But yeah, I think as with all kind of international businesses, we have to do that in our existing business, not just with the acquisitions. Is as the world becomes more connected, people can get value out of working with people in different locations and different cultures. We all need more understanding of how to work together. That is generally one of the most fun parts of working in an organization with an international footprint.
Yeah, and it's also then language barriers and all that type of thing. You mentioned management and moving management potentially across geographies or into new organizations. How do you get and I imagine this is internal as well, but how do you get the management teams of your current business to be able to still manage their own divisions and departments, etc., to a very high standard, and to get them into an integration space? Because surely the responsibilities just go up, and potentially their concentration or the ability to sort of spread themselves becomes quite a challenge for them. I mean, the concentration, the ability to manage their teams maybe at distance because they might be now elsewhere for a few weeks, a month or two. What's that process? I mean, how do you support your management teams in terms of integrations and helping them be successful in that space?
I think it's a couple of things. Firstly, it's in the planning and making sure that your business model is not too thin on the ground for additional resource that you may need to backfill, or make sure in the business model there's resource built into the existing business where you know that you're going to take business out, and don't just pretend that business can carry on running as it was. The other thing is constantly having acquisitions to integrate is actually a fantastic career development challenge for people. Lots of people get quite excited about an acquisition. They're excited about the confidential nature of it ahead of the kind of go live, and then there's the attention and spotlight on it after the acquisition. So it is a great place if you want to kind of develop your career to undertake a new role. So as people are developing through the organization, you try and use the people that are in the top right of the talent box if you can get your hands on them, because these are opportunities to stretch people. You can leave them with responsibility, give them additional responsibility, take them out of their role, backfill them, put them into a bigger role, give them a cross-functional challenge, something like that. So I think it's generally quite exciting and a good way to be able to keep challenging people and build their careers.
Yeah, and I've also noticed that on resumes and CVs or however profile you put forward, I think these days more and more you see executives put forward M&A, post-merger integration, the ability to do those type of things in addition to what would be expected normal for an executive. Normal, I don't know if you can actually say normal, but standard for an executive to be able to do within a particular role. That's an interesting phenomenon, especially the last sort of 5+ years. More and more so, I'm seeing those CVs, those resumes coming through with additional PMI, as in, yeah, I was part of that project. I was part of that project, even though they might not be practitioners. They might have been on the receiving end and saying, look, I've been part of that, of a takeover. I was part of a target entity, and we went through this process. I think that does expand people's minds as well. It's a bit like traveling to a certain extent, but it does broaden your mind. I want to go and just talk a little bit about that cross-functional space around your PMI, because you're a guy that's got massive experience. I mean, in terms of your career at that entity, you'll have so much knowledge of all the different component parts that make up a successful division or a successful target and so on. That cross-functional knowledge how deep does it need to be? I mean, if someone says, hey, I want to be like Richard, I want to be, that's my career, they're in the early 20s, whatever it is, and they say, you know what, I want to follow Richard's footsteps. I mean, what would you say in terms of how would they develop that skill set? I mean, that's just...
Well, I think having an interest in all parts of the business is key, and not pigeonholing yourself into thinking that, I'm in the commercial section or I'm in the operations section, I'm in HR. I think being interested while doing a day job in all the other parts of the business, I think is very important. It's also very interesting. And then looking for roles that keep changing and challenging yourself. I think in some ways I was lucky to do a lot of product work in my early career, which just involved a big part of the end-to-end business, because fundamentally you were responsible for making sure sales of products grew and new products came on board and were introduced and were selling and accelerating. But you had to make sure you'd selected the right supplier, that the warehouse were happy with the packaging, that the systems and IT were all set up, the training was done, and the pricing was set. So it was kind of quite cross-functional anyway in terms of its thinking and its project delivery. So it was probably quite a good area to understand the end-to-end part of the business. And then I guess I probably got a lot of experience through effectively the general management experience of integrating the business out in Malaysia, where I from day one of the acquisition, I had all the HR reporting in, finance reporting in, IT project responsible, the full breadth of functions. And actually, when you've just traveled from the UK, you've just met 500 new employees, and you've got all of this a full kind of functional project to integrate. You learn very, very quickly about all of them and what's important. So I think partly it's making sure you're there and willing to take an opportunity when it presents itself, but being interested in the full spectrum of business.
Yeah, and out of a lot of the people that I've interviewed in on the various podcast episodes, some of the key attributes have been that you've just mentioned now. That willingness to roll up your sleeves, the willingness to get in and just get to know the various parts, because you can't diminish the value of any of the working elements, because they all work together. If you get one part slightly better than another part and the other part sort of lagging, you're still trying to create the value. You're trying to build those synergies just in the integration process, but you can't neglect any part of the of the entity that you're taking on, and even the existing part of your entity. You got to still keep an eye that you're not pulling down the acquired entity. I mean, you're not making them worse off through the integration. You got to be able to add value to that process and let the integrating company have a reverse increase or improvement on your entity. You have to get your hands dirty. Yeah, that's a key attribute in my mind.
Yeah, I agree. I fully agree. And that sort of early integration phase of the first probably 1 to 2 months is where everybody needs, that's part of the integration team, needs to get their hands dirty and really understand the new business. Being accepting of not everything from the acquiring business is perfect or best. Very often it's not best, and you've got to be looking for things that are already better and making sure you don't damage them and look for value there. But as you get your hands dirty, it's so important to be hands-on, because after that 4 to 8 week period, that whole integration plan that you'd written before you really knew this business has changed in people's minds as to how they're going to do it, what the milestones need to be, and sometimes what the budget needs to be to actually achieve them. And so sort of being adaptable by understanding that detail quickly from a kind of really, we've got hands on the business. I think that's also really, really important.
I think it's also useful that because you're a corporate acquirer, you're not driven by by a huge, although time is important, speed and time. It's more around the strategic. Are you reaching the strategic objective of this acquisition?
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to reach the strategic objective with massive time constraints. You can do things a little, I'm guessing, a little bit more deliberately, a little bit more thought through. And if things are not quite working, you do have the ability to adjust. Although I'm sure you're still under time pressure, but it's as compared to, let's say, a private equity environment, you're not entirely under the whip. You still have the ability now to extract the maximum value. I'm guessing. I'm just throwing it out there as a corporate acquirer. I'm just trying to give the audience the difference.
I'd like to think that both types are working in generally for the long-term interest of the business as well. As a corporate acquirer, we have ambitious targets as well, and they're not all 5 years out. They're a lot. We're reporting on a 6 monthly basis publicly, so it's very important that we do add value, and we add value quickly. So I wouldn't necessarily say that it's hugely different. I think perhaps the way we can go about building that with a sort of a overall integration structure and how this is going to look in 5 years' time, and it aligning to kind of a vision, I think that might be slightly differently looked at, possibly. Both sets of types of acquirers are looking to create value. It depends on, there are different opinions on what might be the better way for the actual company being acquired, but I think we're looking to drive value quickly as well, so it's important that we see synergy delivery early.
And there are multiple schools of thought on how you would do that and so on. It becomes such a fascinating subject because there's different methodologies and so on that different people apply, and again, it doesn't necessarily mean corporate acquirers are different to private equity. Everyone's but you might have a slightly different intent, in terms of the organization. I just want to shift a little bit, maybe a bit more personal, Richard, if you don't mind. Just tell us, from your point of view, you've had a successful career so far. I'm sure you'll continue having a successful career, and you'll keep on growing and developing in your role and so on. I just want to ask, do you have a few sort of wise words, if you like, or a few golden nuggets to share with the audience? So what key things have you sort of learned over your career that you might want to share?
I think it's very important to have a growth mindset, and if you don't know what a growth mindset is, look it up and make sure you're working to have a growth mindset. I think it's hugely important to believe that things can be done differently, or things can improve, and it will be okay. We just we need to think of a different way of doing something, and we can achieve it. I think that's hugely important. And then I think the other thing that I probably would say is important is look for opportunities and take them when they present themselves. It's very very difficult to say, I want an opportunity and I want it now and I want it to be this. But actually, if you kind of look for where the opportunities are and go, well, I'm quite interested in everything. Which opportunities, I could take a different route here, take some different opportunities. Obviously, I've stayed at the same company, and I've been lucky that lots of different opportunities have presented themselves within the company. If they stop presenting themselves, then I'll be looking around for other opportunities. So it's kind of, I think, look for opportunities and take them when they present themselves. And that develops you and stretches you and makes life interesting.
Yeah, I love that, because that's also, again, one of the key attributes is that growth, that hunger, I think, for continuous improvement, the purpose-driven sort of mentality of I want to be challenged. I want to keep being challenged, and I want to keep learning and growing as an individual. There's no sort of paradise. There's no nirvana, if you like, where I've reached the pinnacle. I really can't learn much more. That doesn't happen. I've not seen. There's always one more thing to know and one more thing to do. And I love your concept of growth mindset, and I think that's absolutely spot on. And thank you for that. Just if we go then a little bit more personal. So how do you keep yourself sort of sane in a busy world? I mean, M&A, PMI work, post merger integration work, this cross geographies. I'm sure there's a lot of travel, or I don't know so much, maybe not so much anymore, but you're dealing constantly with I would say juggling many things all the time. So tell us, how do you deal with it from a personal point of view? How do you keep yourself on track, sane and happy and healthy in terms of balance, if there is such a thing?
Amazingly, you bring the word up, juggling. I actually enjoy juggling as a pastime, and was just juggling with some old university friends at the weekend. But yeah, lots of sport. I love my sport. I have wife and kids, and they keep me pretty busy. I'm not sure whether that drives me more insane, and therefore I need more sport and juggling to keep me sane. But yeah, going back to growth mindset, juggling, and I also play quite a lot of music. I think those sorts of things actually, whatever kind of a hobby you choose, there are the things that you can keep developing and challenging yourself outside of work. And if you're challenging yourself, it's a great way to switch off from work as well. So I think doing those sorts of things is just really important to stay sane.
I love that. So it's a right brain, left brain kind of, the creativity plus music is and so on, and even juggling. I mean, that must take a huge amount of concentration. You cannot be thinking about anything else. You got to be focused. Highly focused. Yeah, lovely. Thank you very much, Richard. I do appreciate you coming on onto the show today. It's been absolutely fascinating. Thank you very much. Is anything you'd like to share right at the end? And maybe just if you'd like, if somebody would like to get in touch with you and they want to, have a conversation with you, I mean, how would they do that? But if there's any sort of final thoughts and then also just share how people can get hold of you.
No, thanks for inviting me on, Dudley. It's always a pleasure to chat to you. And I think anyone who's considering this as an area, it's hugely interesting and gives a very diverse look into all forms of business, all parts of the business. So if you're interested in the full breadth of business, M&A is an excellent area. And if anyone does want to get in touch, please search me up on LinkedIn. My name is reasonably unique, so you'll find me quite easily.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Richard, please stay on the line. I'm just going to say goodbye to the audience and we'll have a chat now. Just let me say goodbye. Thanks everyone for joining us today on our latest episode of 100 Days and Beyond, the podcast that focuses on that rare, that special community of individuals that deal not just with the mergers and acquisitions portion of business, if you like, but that space called post-merger integration or post-acquisition integration, those people that I think make business work in terms of the growth, development, and even in terms of bringing together great businesses or partially or portions of businesses, bring them together to make them even better, to make a business more global. If that's your philosophy, that's great. Sometimes it's more regional because we want to boost the regional environment or the regional manufacturing. This is in Richard's case, but I think if we look across the board, M&A professionals, especially the post-merger integration guys, have this special, unique ability to tackle cross-function, cross geography, cross-culture, and the willingness to want to continue being challenged. And I love those attributes. And Richard brought a really good point, which was having that growth mindset. Growth mindset for me is critical if you do want to just enjoy it and really enjoy your challenges and so on in life. So thank you very much. Thanks for joining us. 100 Days and Beyond. You're welcome to subscribe, to follow us, to keep joining us on all our episodes. We do at least 3 or 4 episodes a week, and we publish them on audio and on video live stream. And you can also find us on our YouTube channel. All the best. Thank you so much. And please join us on the next episode. All the best. Bye-bye.